We have some really distinguished panelists today. We're going to kick it off. We have two faculty actually to help us. We're going to kick it off with Professor Rob Kaplan, who I'll introduce in a moment, and Jack Spengler, who is going to be, he's going to be our thought leader and framer, and Jack's going to be the moderator. And then we also have Katie Lapp, Executive Vice President of Harvard University. We have Israel Ruiz, Executive Vice President and Treasurer of MIT. Lisa Peterson, Deputy City Manager, and Karen Coyne, who's the Global Head of Health, Safety, and Environment Business Continuity from Novartis. So we have a great panel. I'll be back up to introduce them. Let me just introduce Rob at the moment. So Rob is the Martin Marshall Professor, it's a lot of M's, Martin Marshall Professor of Management Practice in Business Administration. He's also the Senior Associate Dean over at Harvard Business School. He's been at Harvard since 2005. He is a professor, obviously. He teaches the regular business school students as well as executive education. Just a little bit else behind Rob. He's also the co-chairman of Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, a terrific group, which is a global venture philanthropy firm. He also has a really solid history of starting and co-chairing boards of nonprofits in health and education. Before he came to Harvard, he was the vice chairman of Goldman Sachs, which entailed overseeing investment management and investment banking. He also, which I think leads to the leadership qualities, was on their management committee, and he also led their Pine Street Leadership Program. So he's also written 2 books on leadership. And lastly, near and dear to our hearts, he's the co-chair of our Sustainability Executive Committee, which he chairs with Katie Lapp and another faculty member, Jeremy Bloxham, who's the Dean of our Science. So he has been hard at work with us with Katie since 2008, working on how we implement our greenhouse gas reduction goal and overall, really, our sustainability strategy on campus. So he can speak to both, and I'll turn it over to him.
All right, thank you, Heather, and nice to meet you all. You know, you're in an academic institution, and so I know you're learning a lot, so I can't help but take the opportunity to talk a little bit about what I teach, which is leadership and how it relates to sustainability, okay? So that's what I'm going to do, and we may even take a few questions. So I've been teaching here since 05, 06. When I run into people around the world and I tell them what I do, I teach at Harvard Business School. And you know, I'm no longer an investment banker. I'm no longer on Wall Street. They're really pleased with that. You know, people think that's just fantastic. And my God, that's great. Okay, so that part's good. And I always feel good about, you know, positive reinforcement for making a move that kind of some people thought was a little crazy, including my mom. But I ask them what I teach, and I say I teach leadership. And then not so impressed. Not so good. And they give me like, huh? And I go, well, what do you mean, huh? I mean, they say, what is that anyhow? And you know, even people I've known for years, they say, you can't teach that. You know, are you either born with it or you're not? And I say, oh, no, but you can learn. In fact, I haven't met a leader yet who didn't have to learn. They go, yeah, no, I don't think so. Okay, so that's always very depressing. So I've tried to spend the last 6 or 7 years demystifying what leadership is, and here's why. I've learned a little secret, which has turned out to shock me. No one actually knows what leadership is. Everybody talks about it. We talk about a leadership crisis in the world. We know we want more of it. The problem is nobody knows what it is. Some people think leadership is you're charismatic, you give a great speech, you inspire others, you get others to follow you. Others say, no, that's kind of an antiquated view of leadership. You're a servant. You serve people and you empower them by serving them, and that's leadership. This lead-follow thing, that's way out of date. Then I come from an industry, and I would say a lot of business people have the same views, in that they say, are you making money or not? You know where I'm going. Have you won re-election or not? You know, General Shinseki would say, have you fixed the VA or not? If the answer is no, you're not a good leader. And if the answer is yes, I don't know what you're doing, I don't know what you're doing, but you must be a good leader and will attribute all sorts of qualities to you. So in other words, if outcomes are good, then you're a good leader. If you're not, so that's a problem. It's a particularly problem when you think about sustainability, because in this kind of effort, as well as many others, medical research, other things which I'm very actively involved in, the outcomes are not so clear. You know, it's much more about process as it is about outcomes. And so what I've tried to do, I decided I can't damage the field any worse or create any more confusion by coming up with my own definition. So why not? And so let me just start on, I'm just going to work left to right. Here's what I think leadership is. And I think by your presence here today, and I know by what many of you are doing, and I read your bios, as many as Heather gave me, I think people here are practicing this. Leadership to me involves three things. Number one, can you figure out what you believe as if you were in charge? And that last part's a little trickier. Not as a partisan can you figure out what you believe, but if you were in charge, do you know what you would do? Do you know what you believe? Most of us spend most of our lives not knowing. Leaders don't need to always have the answer to what you believe, but leaders are always searching to find that answer and searching for conviction and doing more analysis and talking to more people and doing more work. In those rare periods when you get conviction about what you believe and you really know, second thing a leader does is you summon the courage to act. There's a lot of people in this world that can figure out what they believe, but they don't have the guts to act. And after things get all screwed up, they say in hindsight, I knew that was a mistake. I never would have done that. That was terrible. And yet they were in all the meetings and they never spoke up. Why? Because I'm afraid. I'm afraid. You know? Or I didn't think I had the power. I didn't think I was going to listen. I didn't see what difference it makes. It seemed like everybody had their mind made up. Leaders step up and act. That might be speaking up. It may be working through others. But leaders get the guts to do something about what they believe in those periods they have conviction. And there's a third thing, in my opinion. You do figure out what you believe and act in a way that adds value to someone else. Improves society, the community, another person. There are lots of people in this world that get a lot of conviction about what's good for them and can definitely get up the courage to act on what's good for them. That, sadly, in my opinion, isn't leadership. And in my experience, and this is true in business also, making money, but in any organization I've been involved in, success, outcomes come as a result of adding value to others over a sustained period of time. Okay? That includes business. That even includes Wall Street, despite what people think. There are people on Wall Street that make money for short periods but don't add value. They don't stay in business very long, in my experience. Money, profitability, outcomes come as a result of adding value to someone else. So if that's what leadership is, doesn't sound that difficult, right? So why do leaders fail? And there's a whole series of reasons, and I'll talk about them, but the most important is, are you open to learning? Are you open to asking a question? Are you isolated? They're all three related. Leadership is about being open to learning. It's very difficult in this complex world to figure out what you believe and act in a way that adds value to others if you do not listen to others, work with others, learn to ask questions, learn to listen, learn to mobilize the views of others, which we're going to talk about that. That's what as it relates to collaboration. You can't do the thing on the left all by yourself. Good luck on doing something of significance because the world is just too complicated. You'll never figure things out all by yourself. You won't be able to act in a way that's significant all by yourself. I don't think you can ultimately add value to other people on a big scale unless you learn to work with others. Okay. Second thing, there's a bunch of processes, and we could talk about lots of them, I'll talk about one today, that are essential to doing the thing on the left. And we do this in the Office of Sustainability at Harvard, I believe. This is what we've done. Leaders, if you believe in doing out what's on the left, you have to follow some processes. One of them, you have to determine and come up with a clear vision for how you want to add value. Now, for example, at Harvard, you agree with it or disagree with it, we agonized. We came up with, as a university, we said we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% from 2006 to 2016 net of growth. You agree, disagree, think it's crazy, think it's not aggressive enough, but we came up with a clear articulation of what we want to do to add value. There are lots of other ways to articulate it. Sustainable development, making the next generation, making sure that we have enough resources for the next generation and generations to follow. That's a clear vision on how you add value. But you've got to come up, leaders have to come up with something, a guiding light to judge your actions. It's a prism through which you judge what you're trying to do. Okay? Second thing you have to do as a leader is articulate what are the 3 or 4 or 5 most important priorities you have to accomplish if you're going to add that value. So for example, we decided here that there were a number of activities we needed to not be okay at, we needed to get dramatically better at if we were going to add that value. The way we build buildings here, the way we do purchasing, the way we coordinate among the schools. Every tub on its own bottom, if you ever heard that about Harvard. And this is the trick about sustainability. Sustainability is one of those strange areas where there's enormous, I can't think of anything where there's more mutual dependence than sustainability. You could do everything perfectly, but if somebody else does things opposite, it undermines all your efforts. So we realized here, Harvard is known for independence of the schools, independence of faculty, or like a bunch of, pardon me, I'll say it because I'm one of professional golfers. You know, they used to working independently. All right, so we realized we had to go right at that. And one of our priorities needed to be respect the fact that people need independence, but to create integration. And that's why we formed this committee by school where everybody was represented, because there were a number of university-wide actions we had to take. But you have to set priorities, so we did that. And then lastly, the other thing we do, once you have a clear vision and you have priorities, then you use that as the guiding light for judging every single action you take. How should we build this building? How should we do the fume hoods in the laboratories? How should we do every single thing we do? Does it advance achieving the vision and those priorities, or does it undermine it? Does it make us in alignment, or does it take us out of alignment? And that's the people, the tasks, the way we're organized, the culture, the leadership styles, every single thing we do. And so I'd say I'm a little biased, but what we've done with greenhouse gas emissions here, setting a target, the Office of Sustainability, we have tried to follow this model. Clear vision, clear priorities, and everything we do every day is alignment. And it's not enough for us to know about it. We have to communicate to the whole university. Here's the vision. Here are the priorities. So what that does is empower people to act themselves. We've challenged everybody in this university. We can't do this without you. We need your action. But that's what leadership is sharing enough information, vision, priorities, and trying to create an alignment by empowering people and getting them involved and telling them exactly what they can do to help us achieve this, or help us together achieve this goal. Okay, so then that gets us to the theme of this conference that you're at. Leadership, I've learned, is a team sport. There's a lot of things you can do as a leader to help add value and to help others. But if you're doing something of significance, sustainability is a classic case. You can't do this alone, as we're learning. You know, if one country in this world does one thing, another country doesn't follow any of the rules, it's going to be a terrible problem. So the power of others in creating Kaplan, the power of the group, diverse skills, diverse interests, diverse views, diverse perspectives, diverse resources, but bringing them together with a clear common vision about what you're trying to accomplish, clear priorities. You can bring a group together if you read everyone in and then frame issues that are tensions between us, which always exist, and trade-offs. You can mobilize the power of a group to debate them, discuss them, and also people bring different skills and different ability to help the group achieve the goal. And so if I were teaching sustainability as a case, this is what we'd be talking about. And this is what the panel you're about to hear, I think, is going to talk through from their own perspectives about what Harvard and MIT are doing with the city of Cambridge and other activities, really using some of these concepts as well as others, but mobilizing the power of the group, the power of relationships, the power of diversity in its broadest sense, the power of clear vision and priorities, working with a group and aligning them to achieve a goal that is more important than any one of them or any one institution that they each represent. And I think, I'd like to think, and a lot of what you're doing here and what we're doing is trying to create a case study for using that approach. So let me stop there. And let's go to questions, anything you want to ask about, and then otherwise we will turn to our panel. Yes, sir.
Would you speak to the role of failure and the role that plays in this?
Yes. So I talked about why do leaders fail, isolation, inability to learn, and failure is part of learning. People think failure is something to be filled. Most of us fail in small ways and sometimes big ones most of the time. There's nothing wrong with failure as long as you learn from it, and then you go back at it again. Now, what do I joke around when I teach? The most important words in business and in collaboration and in leadership, and I joke around that we should all practice saying them. I don't know. I was wrong. I made a mistake. I changed my mind. I screwed up. Sorry. I apologize. Those are all good ones. But all those go with a boo-boo, a mistake. And mistakes are fine, but you have to learn from them and then act on them. By the way, the thing I hate more than anything, this is a tangent to this. I was watching a debate yesterday on television where they were debating sustainability and whether Congress would act and Obama should be taking executive action, all that stuff. And there's still an active debate out there on this issue. What do the scientists believe? Is there consensus? Is there not a consensus? Science good, bad? And what leaders do and use the power of a group, so we have failed somehow to frame this issue. And we can't even agree on the facts. I used to joke around, in the business I was in, we used to say, economic forecasting is really hard. It's so hard, it's not only hard to predict the future, it's hard to predict the past. And the fact is, on sustainability, we can't even seem to describe the past. But I would say back on this, I think there's a lesson to be learned from this failure. And that I think this, I was thinking this yesterday, we should back up. And if we did nothing else, have a television program or a debate that just framed the facts. Pro and con, lay out both of them. Great. Get a group together that agrees, disagrees, whatever, and frame the facts. I think that one of the lessons of failure here is back up and let's start at square one again. Because I actually think what to do and how to do it would fall out of it if we could just have a debate, pro and con, about the facts. And I think we've been missing that. But that's a side point that just makes me think of that.
Is this model ethically constrained in any way? Or is this applicable? This could be the NSA putting together its program. This could be Al-Qaeda.
So here's what I think. Figuring out what you, so there's a whole, there are a bunch of strands then that come out of this. This is the 100,000-foot version. I believe strongly that your values and ethical boundaries are an essential element in trying to figure out what you believe as if you were in charge. Now, the problem is, despite how terrible some people, things they do, they obviously believe that they believe it's consistent with their values and their ethical boundaries. And so this is part of diversity and the power of the group, is to understand that we all may look like we all agree here. We agree on a lot, but in terms of where we're coming from, each of us in this room is unique. And I think it's probably not a bad idea to get values and boundaries on the table, because sometimes you'll be surprised. I teach a very international group. I think bribery is wrong, okay? Half the people I teach have paid a bribe and intend to pay a bribe in their life. And they don't think there's anything unethical about it wrong because of the country they come from. So I think the only mistake you can make is not getting those things out there and debating them. and create mutual understanding about where people are coming from. And Heather, I will take your lead as to when to stop this and go on to the next. Yes?
And who does judge the quality of a vision?
Well, that's interesting. Ultimately, you do, but here's the test I always use. Can you write, I always like to do this, take out a piece of paper, and for those working, can you write down in 2 or 3 sentences or 2 or 3 lines clearly how you're trying to add value that's distinctive, okay? Then the test is, can you turn to the person next to you, and do they understand what you're saying? First, do you understand what you're saying? Or do you want to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it and think about it? That's fine. But ultimately, when you're ready to communicate it, do others understand it, and are you understood clearly? And it's worth doing that because the power of a vision is that it is a great aligning force and a prism through which you judge what you do. But ultimately, you've got to be understood and mutually understood to do it. So I guess ultimately, you starts with you, but then others and those you're trying to work with. All right. I guess in the interest of time, taking about my allotted time. So thank you, and I guess we will turn next to the panel. Yes?
So first up is Lisa Peterson, who's the Deputy City Manager as of 2013 for the City of Cambridge. She chairs, or she was responsible for day-to-day operations of the city, and she chairs a lot of committees, including important ones like capital budgets and Community Preservation Act Committee. She's been in the City of Cambridge, at the City of Cambridge for about 23 years, so she is an expert on the City of Cambridge. Before that, she served in the Peace Corps. She has a master's in public health from Boston University. And I will say that in her previous post as the Public Works Commissioner for Cambridge, that she was one of the small core team who met with Henrietta and all folks from Steve Lanoux and others from all sides, the city, MIT, and Harvard, for about a year to hammer this out and really make it happen. So I credit you with sticking with us and helping us shape this, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here, and that was a very sort of inspiring introduction on leadership. You know, so when we're trying to talk about making an impact on something as significant as climate change, you know, the best we can do, we feel, is in collaboration. And that is the context in which the Cambridge Compact for Sustainable Future was created. And indeed, it's the context for many of successful sustainability initiatives in which Cambridge is involved. I wanted to talk about 2 of those initiatives in particular. A few sort of contextual points about Cambridge. I mean, Cambridge is very small geographically, very in population, it's very dense, and we are really a heavily built out city, so we have a lot of building stock. And a guiding principle as we think about sustainability is that to achieve true sustainability, we need to look at finding the right balance among 3 main objectives. One is that we're looking at sort of social progress. Thank you. That takes into account the needs of everyone. So we're looking at quality of life and health. A second is that we're looking at the protection of the natural environment and considered and careful use of the natural resources. And then third, we're also looking at economic development. We're looking at our economy, having a strong economy and a strong employment base. And so it's the intersection of looking at the natural environment, economic development and employment, and healthy communities and quality of life that's essential. So we're looking at those together. And it's in this context, part of this context, that the Cambridge Compact for a Sustainable Future was created. This initiative was spearheaded by our former mayor, Henrietta Davis, who's joining us today. And Henrietta convened the city, Harvard, and MIT to form a community collaboration to address climate change and to make Cambridge more sustainable. The compact was signed a year ago in May of 2013 by the mayor, the city manager, and the presidents of both Harvard and MIT, and then soon thereafter by Novartis and other large institutions. So we currently have about 20 signatories. The compact declaration recognizes that climate change is a crisis and commits participants to working together and taking action. The signatories identified key potential areas of collaboration: building energy efficiency, climate change mitigation and preparedness planning, renewable energy systems, sustainable transportation, waste management, water management, urban natural resources, public information and education, green tech incubation and promotion. Very broad, very big tent. The signatories then recognized that the compact needs to be sort of institutionalized and that building capacity and support for it is a critical next step. And so there's a number of additional steps were identified in terms of sort of building capacity and sustainability of the compact. Includes continuing to grow the number of signatories within the Cambridge community. So we started with 4, we're now at 20. Establishing a steering committee of signatory partners to coordinate activities. Developing a framework to collect and analyze data to document progress towards our goals. Creating a forum for signatories to report annually on progress towards the goals of this compact, and a strategy to communicate actions, activities, and metrics to the community. This has been an extremely challenging piece of our work to date. And then identifying obstacles to the goals of the community compact that can be jointly addressed by the signatories. Just to sort of note in terms of the membership structure, we have signatory members, which we have took a long time to define who's going to be able to sign on to the compact. So it's defined as sort of business, a nonprofit, or a government agency with a physical presence in Cambridge and operational control of building, waste, or transportation systems, and have a demonstrated leadership in advancing sustainable practices. And then we also have this category of a compact resource, which is an individual or organization that's willing to sort of share expertise. And I expect our first compact resource is going to be our former mayor, Henrietta, who's now retired from being our mayor. While initiated by the city, the goal is that the compact is going to work as an independent, nonprofit organization. So it's not just going to be controlled by one entity. In terms of the process to developing the compact, I want to say that it was very important to have strong leadership from the top. The mayor, the city manager, the presidents of both MIT and Harvard signed the compact and were committed to it. That was very, very significant. There were clear goals. Yet I want to also acknowledge that implementation takes time. There's been a year. We've spent a lot of time on developing our governance process, developing priority areas, and talking about how we most effectively move the organization forward. So we have identified 3 priority areas: building energy, sustainable transportation, and climate change preparedness. We do have a building energy subcommittee, and we are currently working on getting staff for the compact, because that also is another sort of logistical reality. So I also want to mention quickly another significant project the city is working on collaboratively, which is our vulnerability assessment and climate change preparedness plan. So we're currently working on our vulnerability assessment that will serve as a foundation for the preparedness plan. And the assessment is looking broadly at potential climate change impacts from increased temperatures, more intense precipitation, more extreme storms, and storm surge flooding associated with sea level rise. So the vulnerability assessment involves an intense level of community and stakeholder engagement. The effort also includes an expert advisory panel to guide the city on the technical protocols and approaches, and it's heavily influenced, I'd say, with Harvard and MIT expertise. We also have a technical advisory committee that includes property owners, residents, utilities, institutions, and state agencies. So we're collaborating and coordinating with the state Massachusetts Department of Transportation, the Boston Water and Sewer Commission on a storm surge modeling, a very detailed storm surge modeling. And the city is also working with Harvard University Climate Change Preparedness Work Group that's developing plans to make university campus more resilient. What is key, I think, about this work and the importance is getting the right people to the table. And it's an important point to stress in so many of these projects. It's important to have the right voices and to make sure that people are heard and that people are really represented. You know, example of this, I just want in closing, is to mention, like, when we think about Cambridge and Boston, we have the Charles River between us, and we're looking at sea level rise and storm surge. So you have Cambridge, and then you have Boston Water and Sewer, and then you have the separate regional authority, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, that actually controls the dams. So it's been really important to make sure that all those people are at the table as we're looking at our future scenario planning for flooding and sea level rise and develop our preparedness plan. So these are two examples I wanted to mention, and I'm happy to discuss other projects or whatever during the question and answer. Thank you.
So that was a terrific overview of the key cooperation example that all the panelists will be able to speak to. And I think that, but in addition to that, you're going to hear from the other panelists some other collaborative partnerships that they have worked on or built that are happening concurrently. So the common thread is the Cambridge Compact for a Sustainable Future, but there will also be other models discussed. So with that, I get to Katie Lapp, who's our Executive Vice President here at Harvard. It's actually daunting looking at all the things that are over or under her supervision. You wonder, what does someone do who oversees the university for 26 million square feet, 700 buildings, and about 45,000 people? Well, she's a Chief Administrative Business Operating Officer, and she has all the aspects of financial administration, campus services, including sustainability, planning and project management, health services, IT, and diversity. In essence, she works closely with the president, she reports to the president, and the corporation and all of our deans to ensure the financial, capital, and operational resources for Harvard's future. Before coming to us, she was the Executive Vice President of Business Operations at the University of California System. And before that, she was Executive Director and CEO of the New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority. So if you've ever ridden on the subway in New York City, you can thank Katie. She's also the co-chair of our executive committee here on sustainability at Harvard and oversees sustainability. And she was the co-chair of our most recent 2013 Greenhouse Gas Review Task Force. One of the models she'll speak to that she chairs is actually the Boston Green Ribbon Commission's Higher Ed Working Group, which is also a really interesting network of healthcare, finance, real estate, utilities, and the like that are also trying to address community-based and regional sustainability, especially focused on climate change. So we're delighted to have Katie.
So let me first start with this slide. This is a quote from our president back in 2008, where she made it very clear that she felt universities have a special role and special responsibility in confronting climate change, the challenges of climate change and environmental sustainability. We have some of the greatest minds at MIT and Harvard and universities around the world. We have very enthusiastic students that want to see this problem tackled. And we have a leadership responsibility to do that. So she made that very clear shortly after assuming office at the end of 2007. Here at Harvard, we obviously have over 260 courses offered on energy and sustainability in the environment. We have over 225 faculty involved in the Harvard University Center for the Environment. They're engaged in energy and environmental related research. And we have so far raised about $120 million in our campaign, which we launched last September, really targeting energy and the environment research. Many of our alumni, our dedicated alumni, are just as concerned about this issue as everyone in this room here today. And it shows by the amount of money that we've been able to raise. So back in 2007, 8, Drew Faust announced a goal, and this is the people assembled in Harvard Yard. Vice President Al Gore was in attendance, and she set a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from Harvard by 30% by 2016, using 2006 levels as a baseline. So far, we just reported out a few months ago that we have, now the goal that I just mentioned was including growth and renovation. So our goal was to achieve 30%, inclusive of growth and renovation of spaces. Good news is, so far from 2006 to FY 2013, we've achieved a 21% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions since 2006 levels, inclusive of growth and renovation of spaces. If we were to take that out, we would have achieved 31% reduction. So it's an amazing thing that's been achieved, but the achievement goal is very distributed throughout this university. It is the staff, it's the students, it's the faculty, and the leadership of the Office for Sustainability. I can tell you, it's the dogged determination of people when it comes to this goal, with Heather's leadership and others throughout this university, have just been amazing. There's very few places, as Rob Kaplan was mentioning, we're known for our very decentralized structure here at Harvard. But to see this kind of achievement in this kind of period of time has just been remarkable. And it's really because I think it shows people are very concerned about this issue writ large. So where are we going from here? We announced about last month, I believe it was, earlier May, that Drew announced the launch of a Climate Change Solutions Fund. In addition to all the money that's being raised in the campaign, she has set forth a goal of another $20 million to be raised specifically for research on climate change. And there will be challenge grants to our faculty and students around the research. We also had a task force that looked at how far we've come and the results we just showed you in terms of what we've achieved. And the question we had for ourselves is, do we reaffirm that goal? 2016 is not that far away. We only have 21% reduction inclusive of growth. Is our goal too aggressive? Is it not aggressive enough? And the task force that was created, that I was on, along with others, said, no, this goal, we knew it was going to be very difficult to achieve back in 2006 when it was announced, 2007, but we're going to achieve it. So we reaffirmed that, and we're redoubling our efforts to get to that. And then we also announced last month that the Harvard Endowment, Harvard Management Company, is now a signatory. It's the first endowment to be a signatory to the UN Principles for Responsible Investing, as well as part of the Carbon Disclosure Project. So trying to show leadership in every way throughout all parts of our university. Now, as Rob Kaplan mentioned, one of the parts about leadership is really not just from top down and directives, but it's also this groundswell of support for a vision that's set forth. And so, as I mentioned, our president obviously set forth the mission, but everybody represented on this slide has kind of lined up accordingly and to a person are figuring out ways in which they can contribute, whether it's turning off the computer at night or turning off the lights. I'm known for going around Mass Hall, unplugging lots of things, to lots of the detriment of people that work for me. And just, when the heat rises, to make sure people turn down all electrical use. So it's been an amazing, amazing effort. We're obviously cultivating partnerships for global impact. Lisa just mentioned about the Cambridge Compact. There are the pictures of not only Henrietta, but Raphael Reif, MIT president, along with Drew Faust, signing on to that leadership compact. Now, I'm just going to take a few more minutes to just talk about very specific projects where I think the collaboration and the vision is pretty evident. This is a picture of what's called the Massachusetts Green High Performance Computing Center. It's about a 90,000 square foot facility, and it is designed to house our high performance research capacity. The interesting part about this facility is it's actually, it's kind of a condo type arrangement. 5 local universities, research universities got together, MIT, Harvard, BU, Northeastern, and several others came together to figure out ways in which to deal with their high performance computing needs in a more effective and environmentally friendly way. We each contributed money to build this facility. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts contributed $25 million as well, as did two for-profit entities. This now houses our major high-performance computing and it's hydroelectric power. So it's not only efficient, it's very effective. And one of the more recent announcements coming out of a university around the Big Bang Theory, actually the performance, the research for that was done actually out of this facility. And the member of our team, member of the team from Harvard that was part of that announcement, said that they would not have been able to do it but for the fact that they had this capacity at their ready. As Heather mentioned, I'm also on the Boston Green Ribbon Commission. This was created by former Mayor Tom Menino. His feeling and his dedication to addressing what the challenges of climate change will do to the city of Boston. I head up, and Israel is part of this group, the higher ed sector of this commission. But what's interesting about this commission, very similar to what Cambridge has done, it has CEOs from all the major companies in and around Boston. So we sit with the heads of the hospitals, heads of all the real estate groups, all the major industries. We sit in one room and talk about the issues that are confronting all of us. One thing that we did last April was I co-chaired a conference along with Kate Walsh, the CEO of the Boston Medical Center, and we had a conference focused on labs and the energy-intensive usage of these spaces. We had people from all across the greater Boston area, from all the sectors that have these research labs. We also brought in people from all over the country to come and share their experiences. The readout from the conference was amazing, and I think that we'll be sharing our best practices consistently. And so Heather and her team did a great job on that. We also held a summit about 3 months ago, I guess now, over at the business school. It was a climate preparedness summit. We had the cities of Cambridge, cities of Boston. We had MIT, BU, BC, Tufts, every higher ed institution in the greater Boston region. We had people from the fire departments, the police departments, their emergency responders, et cetera. We did tabletop exercises. We had people from our faculty, MIT faculty, and others talking about the challenges. The fact of the matter is, when you see what happened in New York City post-Sandy, here in the Boston area and Cambridge, we would be faced with similar, if not more, severe problems. So this was the beginning of a multi-year, multifaceted effort that we'll be doing along with the City of Cambridge to make sure that we're as resilient as possible, if God forbid, we are faced with a similar challenge. And so the lessons learned, and I'll just stop here, is really the senior leaders that drive a shared vision and accountability, consistent with what Rob Kaplan mentioned. Leverage individual strengths. This is an area that I can't stress too much. Whether it be our staff, faculty, or students, every single one of them comes to this with a different skill set, different perspective, but we're all working in the same direction, so it's fantastic. And then obviously the focus on the common goal, which I think all of us can join in on this and figure out in small ways and big ways we can make a difference. So with that, I will hand it back to Heather. Thank you.
Next, we turn to Israel Ruiz, who is the Executive Vice President and Treasurer at MIT. He is the Institute's Chief Fiduciary Officer and responsible for leading all of their administrative and financial functions. He too works with the corporation, the president and members of MIT's senior leadership team to ensure the fiduciary, capital, and operational resources are well allocated, so MIT will be here for many, many, many more decades. I also wanted to just mention as well that he, in addition, like Katie said, is a member of the Boston Green Ribbon Commission's Higher Ed Working Group. He personally was educated at MIT, and he's also from Spain, from one of the most beautiful cities, Barcelona. So he is at home in this international crowd. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to kind of swiftly move here, because the first part of sustainability is that your head's kind of turned and you've been on that side. So I'm just, for the sake of wellness, I'm going to stand here. So it's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to actually look at the conference logo and to see Harvard and MIT together. Because part of, I mean, I've been in this role now for about 3 years. And I have to say that in the last decade, 15 years that I've been around this area, the partnership and the collaboration with Harvard and MIT on big issues for humanity have been extraordinary. And I think that's been part of my personal motivation to really drive that. If you think about what we're doing that we're not here talking about, but it's about changing and transforming the landscape for education. And here we're actually trying to put our mark together in how we change the world for a better and sustainable place. So that to me is a very big personal motivation. And I kind of used to use this kind of tagline to say, I've been living here in Boston for about 15 years, and I never owned a car. And I used to describe myself as the greenest person trying to do that. Now I gave up that in November with 3 kids, but that's kind of part of the story. So for today, I wanted to answer a question like why we collaborate, right? I mean, you could take a position at Harvard or MIT. We can just do everything by ourselves, don't we? And we have the kind of ability. We have potentially the resources. And what you realize is that when you try to tackle these big issues, we must collaborate. I mean, Rob talked about this at the beginning, but definitely there's no one single institution, no one single professor who can tackle something as complex as the sustainability of our planet. We've put out here lots of things, but a lot has to do with the shared concept and has to do with gaining the understanding and everyone's ability to really think about the shared resource, which is the planet. So you have here a bunch of them. I'm not going to list them through. But when you kind of look at the Boston-Cambridge initiatives and how the Charles River goes in between the two cities, you realize how critical climate adaptation and sustainability it is for our institutions. Certainly, perhaps even more critical for MIT, just going on the banks of the Charles River. And for a while, I could actually envision Boston racing to build a very tall wall on their side, and then letting the water flow over what is MIT campus. So that would not be a good solution for us. So we clearly share all these concepts and this kind of map of anywhere from the urban infrastructure and mobility and water and land and everything all the way. And our institutions, our homes are on top of this infrastructure. So it's critical for us to gain respect, trust in this collaborative environment so that we can all work together towards the same goal. So what are the kinds of activities that we're involved with, some of which Katie alluded to? You can see a bunch of partnerships with Cambridge. Of course, this is our host city, and they are greatly open to sustainability. I think a lot of credit goes to Henrietta during her tenure as mayor, but the reality is we've been involved in sustainability efforts for many, 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 many decades. Many of our faculty are involved, deeply involved in some of these individual efforts. I will comment on one in particular, aside from the sustainability and the compact, the Kendall Square Eco District, and what that could mean as a test case for Cambridge and MIT. So this is a different picture, but it's the same folks. So you can see the same faces and the same kind of celebration. We were pleased and honored to be part of the founders of the compact. And I think, again, Henrietta's leadership, as well as Drew's and Raphael's leadership, made that happen. We're also kind of one of the things you realize when you are either Harvard or MIT or the city, you have strong convening power to get going with something like this. And as Henrietta kind of alluded to, and some of the other folks in past speeches, now we have a cadre of folks that are interested in becoming part of the sustainability and the compact here in Cambridge. So this is the other project I wanted to tell you just a little bit about, which is to try to put one thing that Rob didn't talk about when the vision, but it really is about, for instance, the kind of comment or affirmation that Drew made in 2006 about reduction of greenhouse gases. It is about boldness. The vision, what really moves us as institutions, as folks that want to push the environment forward and kind of the domain of knowledge, it's really to be bold. And in a dense urban city, to try to do bold things, it's actually very hard. That's one of the reasons MIT has a partnership in Abu Dhabi with Masdar City. and we have the institute there, right? One of the reasons that we want to test new things is because it's easier to test those new things in new land. And we're learning a lot. And what we're trying to do is, from those learnings, bring them back to an urban setting that's perhaps more applicable to many of where you are located, judging from the institutions you represent. This is an attempt at doing the same thing at a smaller scale in a district that occupies, for those of you not familiar with MIT, you clearly know where the Charles River is. All along, this is the campus of MIT, and this is what we call Kendall Square, along the main transportation line that unites actually Boston with Cambridge at MIT and then beyond to Harvard Square. So if you look at how we move from MIT to Harvard, in fact, I came taking the red line and coming here. That's a major node of transportation, a major node of sustainability that we're actually working with the Massachusetts Transportation Authority to really see how we can do as we grow this area. But if you look at this domain, this is way, kind of well beyond the MIT campus. The campus kind of stops here. We have ambitions to grow this area, to densify it, and to bring more opportunities for proximity. And what we want to do is work with all the businesses and developers along this area to come up with what's beyond what's possible. So we want to envision here goals that will go beyond what sustainable means today, what sustainable may mean in a decade. Can we get there to the most extreme cases? I don't know. And the truth is probably nobody knows. But in a very MIT way, we want to do that statement in a grounded way, not as a declaration that says we're going to be like that. We want to study the area and see how we actually make it work as an example, as a case study that then we can take to any city in the world and try to replicate it. The second one is this Net Zero Task Force, and I want to use this opportunity to credit two of the key members. So one of the questions that Heather said is like, how can we do our vast jobs at our universities? Well, that's through great staff, and that's the clear example. So Julie Newman, director of the Office of Sustainability, and Steve Lanoux, who's been there for quite a while for pushing this environment. That's kind of what we do. They are participating in this Net Zero Task Force. Net Zero is another one of these Cambridge initiatives. A lot of community involvement, a lot of members of our community wanting to be net zero. This is a tough statement. Particularly in highly research-intensive buildings like the ones we tend to build, achieving net zero is really tough. However, we want to be there. We want to, because tough problems is what defines, in particular, MIT, we want to try to work together to see how we can do better, and hopefully we can achieve that goal, at least in the way we speak at MIT, asymptotically. Then the other one that Katie already mentioned is the Green Ribbon Commission. So we do that. We achieve, I'm a Bostonian, I live in Boston these days, so I represent MIT, but I also represent the city. So this, I would say, the same way that we've credited Henrietta and leadership, I would say here the credit goes to Mayor Menino and a member of the community in Boston that really stepped up and made this happen. The problems are so complex and the sustainability issue is so intertwined that if you don't have personal leadership behind it, this doesn't start. And that's the way it started, and same way in kind of mirror ways here in Cambridge. This is another example of what we want to kind of go beyond, and Julie talks about the next gen Office of Sustainability. Well, what we want to do, and we have been doing, trying to do, is convert the campus as a living laboratory. This is an example of one of our professors' research applied to Cambridge. There are many examples, both at MIT and Harvard. But part of what we want to do is deploy that research locally and use that the same way that the Net Zero or the Kendall Eco District, or in this case, using and understanding what's the solar footprint on the roofs of your city, may actually help position and be more efficient in using your resources. And then, kind of in closing, this is the other one mechanism that we've used at MIT. A while back, we launched the MIT Energy Initiative, which is a very successful initiative with lots of involvement, 600 of our 1,000 faculty involved somehow, with a lot of student research and academic components, lots of support from both the federal government as well as the entities that represent oil and gas industry. We've now paired it with an environment initiative that was just launched a couple of weeks ago. And with the mix of those two, we hope to be able to make those contributions. As an example of this one, the student body in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, that's what DUST means at MIT, is working to create an efficiency and an energy efficient plan for Cambridge as an example of one of these cross-cutting collaborations. So our expectation is that with the joint initiative on the environment, as well as the energy, we will be able to make and step up those contributions. So this is the last slide just to put students at work. So what they do is apply that research, apply this knowledge, and try to then disseminate it to the world. That is our biggest contribution as learning institutions, to teach them how this is done and then deploy them to the work of the world. Okay, thank you.
Our last speaker is Karen Coyne, who I said before is the Global Head of Health, Safety, and Environment and Business Continuity for the global research giant Novartis. Prior to joining Novartis, Karen's previous role was advisor at New York University's International Center for Enterprise Preparedness, which is really interesting. She's a certified professional environmental auditor, and she holds a BS in Marine Fisheries Biology and a master's in Natural and Environmental Resources, Research Administration and Management. So she has a very great background, and we look forward to hearing from her.
Give you a snapshot of the private sector viewpoint from Novartis and a little bit about our sustainability approach, why we're excited to be part of the compact, and then just a snapshot of some of the things that we're doing in our lab environment. So for us, why is Cambridge important for us? We as a corporation made a conscious decision about 12 years ago, I think, to locate our headquarters for research here in Cambridge. We took the old Necco Candy Building, as many of you may know, on Mass Ave here, renovated it. We've since grown over into the Tech Square. And being here in Cambridge was important for us for a lot of reasons. First, just the great learning environment, the great institutions that are here, the people. It's an innovation incubator, and for a research, pharmaceutical research arm, it's all about innovation and discovering the next new class of compounds to cure disease. Cambridge is certainly an early adopter and a trendsetter, and it's really a community which we felt exhibits true collaboration, and some of what we've talked about. Why the Community Compact is important to us as a corporation, and Henrietta's quote from last year's press release, that really climate change is a crisis, and we view that for our corporation, and it's one that needs collaborative effort to help solve. So being part of the compact for us is help building that sustainable future for our company as well as for our community in which we're based. It's having the right stakeholders at the table for open dialogue. It's a place where solutions can come together, and we can leverage ideas to help leverage change. So those are some of the reasons why it was important for us when Jeff Lockwood, our communications director, came to me a year ago and said, hey, there's this compact thing. What do you think? I said, it took about a nanosecond to say, are you kidding? Yeah, of course, this would be great. We'd love to participate and be a partner. Just a quick snapshot. It's the requisite, you're here from corporate. You got to tell everybody who you are, and that has to be part of your slide deck, so I won't bore you with it. But basically, we're headquartered in Switzerland as a company, about 135,000 associates. We, after our recent portfolio announcement of reduction of some of our divisions and sale to some of our other pharma industry, we'll have 3 main divisions left, about $58 billion in annual sales. So for us as a corporation with a large global footprint, we feel that one of the things that we can bring to the compact in this collaboration is our global footprint and what we do as a corporation, and have that leverage in some of the ideas that we've been incubating in-house. Cambridge is the headquarters of research. We have about 2,400 associates here in Cambridge that work. Our strategy is really driven by patient needs and not what's going to be the most profitable drug to make. Yes, in the end, that's important, but we figure that our research strategy is if we focus on unmet patient need, those small populations of patients who have a really small disease cluster, not big pharma companies would typically be interested in researching, that particular disease, because it is such a small population, we have found that if we can focus on the disease pathways that we know most about with these small populations, it turns out to be the same pathways for more common diseases. So therefore, we have a win-win of helping support and develop compounds for small populations, as well as leverage that knowledge for other more common diseases. We want to be fast to fail. If something's not going to work, that's fine. We learn from it, we disband, we form a new group. And we have strong collaborations with academia. So to jump to the corporate picture of sustainability, this is our 4 pillars of corporate citizenship. The last one over on the far right is the environment, and that's the linkage to what we're talking about here. So kind of common themes that you see in most large corporations. But for the environmental aspect, it's really risk prevention and management and using our resources properly. Take that big picture snapshot and drill it down into energy usage. Here's some data from Siemens Corporation in terms of the typical usage of energy consumption in the pharmaceutical industry. This is inclusive of manufacturing and labs. So in trying to link energy efficiency and energy conservation, we have to start at a baseline. So you can see from our industry, the largest use of energy is the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, taking about 65% of common across the board. Processes up at the top, the 25%. For us in the research environment, that really translates to the lab. And for us, in the labs, our labs are changing. So we have our basic chemistry labs, biological labs, but increasingly we're becoming very heavy data-oriented on data informatics, computing power to analyze all this data. You know, once the human genome was sequenced in that huge bank of data, it's grown exponentially, and research is really becoming much more data-driven, data-intensive, and with that comes equipment. More of our labs are looking more and more like data centers, and this is an area that we are trying to focus on, this issue of plug loads, of having all these pieces of computational equipment being plugged in and adding to that load. Just in terms of a few figures, as a research division, in 2009, our total greenhouse gas emissions were 102,000 tons of CO2. In last year, 2013, we brought it down to 81,000 tons of CO2. So we've had approximately a 20% drop in our greenhouse gas emissions, while at the same time we had a 20% increase in terms of square footage of labs that we have built. So it's been a lot of great effort. In terms of some of the things that we are working on, we're really approaching sort of energy conservation in 2 big buckets. The first is just basic energy management and how we do it. And those are things like defining basic principles and management processes for energy management, roles and responsibilities, doing energy reviews, energy audits. And second is setting standards for buildings, new buildings and labs. So some of the mid to long-term things that we've worked on are looking at air change, a reduction in the air change rate. That's the amount of air coming in to a particular defined space. How often are we turning that over? Fume hood management using variable airflow hoods, some setback controls, managing the sashes, the openings of the fume hoods, whether it's a vertical sash or horizontal sash, having sensors in front of the hoods when it's occupied and not. Some of the easier things are really more around the building aspect of operation and maintenance of setting, heating, ventilation, set points in the summer and the winter, whether or not a space is occupied or not. Electric motor management is very engineering oriented. And lighting, we're focusing really on ambient light. Our new buildings that are being built are using much more use of natural light and more use of focused task lighting right at a person's workstation. So just a snapshot. In terms of energy efficient, see, we're building, you've probably seen if you're local to the area, down on Mass Ave, 2 new buildings, one designed by Maya Lin and one by Tashika Morrow. They will be finished in the end of this year. We'll start commissioning work in first quarter of 2015 and expect to move in mid-year next year. As we were designing these buildings, health, safety, and environment professionals were on the project design team, applying our standards for energy management as well as design aspects of buildings to include all these things that you see here. Some of them are really standard practices now in terms of buildings, but these were just a snapshot of the things that we considered, inclusive of a trigen utility plant that will give us power, heat, cooling, water management, lighting, and so forth. Lastly, our laboratory design. We're going to much more open concept lab design where we are focusing on collaboration. It presents a challenge from a health, safety, environment perspective to have these open labs and team space, quiet space, equipment space. How do you design a lab space to have this vision where you want collaborative space? It's open, there's no walls. How do you protect associates from unknown contaminants or things, compounds that they're working with? So some of the things that we have worked on are fume hoods. Because we have less chemical usage in the labs themselves, we have less need for fume hoods. Our plug loads that I just spoke of, and lighting. Some of the supporting work around this open lab concept is using a concept called safety zones, where we talk about the rules for use of protective equipment and ventilation, so forth. So I think that is it. And thank you very much.
I'm going to turn it over now to Jack Spengler, who's going to invite the panel to come sit up here. Jack Spengler is a professor at the School of Public Health. He also heads up the Center for Health and the Global Environment. He has conducted research on the health effects of air pollution, including working on public housing. He actually did a really interesting living lab project here on campus with our dorms. We're renovating Harvard's undergraduate dorms, and he's been doing pre and post studies to see the impact of temperature, air quality, and a number of different things on people's life, how their health is.
And visits to our health clinic.
Yes, and visits to health clinic. He's got more data. He also is a member consultant of the EPA, the World Health Organization, Qatar Research Foundation, and very cool factor, South by Southwest Eco Conference.
That's the best.
As you all.
And Burning Man.
Are you cool enough to go to Burning Man? Wow. I'm definitely not cool enough to go to Burning Man. Long story short, you also know that Jack has also played a very pivotal role in translating research and teaching into action on our campus, and co-founding our initial sustainability group. And he continues with the Office for Sustainability to be a senior advisor. He's on our executive committee, and he was also on our both greenhouse gas task force. So over to Jack and the wonderful panel.
Thanks. Karen, Israel, Katie, Lisa, thank you for your presence this afternoon. I think the fact that we had government, we had private sector, leading corporation, we had our 2 academic institutions, I think epitomizes exactly what this panel discussion is about. Now, I noticed at the end of this morning's session, there were still hands up, still questions, still a desire to participate. So I am going to really make this yours. This is your meeting. You've come all the way. This is your chance to get as much information as possible. So I have a whole set of questions that I can fill up the time, and I'm going to ask the ones I have high on my list, but I'm only going to ask 2. And then I want to see hands up, and we have Chris is going to be over there, you're over here, Jen. All right, so I'm going to ask all of you, I think in some ways, yes, all of you have been involved in the compact, correct? Yes, you signed it? So, you know, at times, many of these well-minded public-private partnerships, government, academics, institutions, start off with tremendous political value, PR value, but they seem to wither on the vine, and there is little action. So I want to know from any of you, or all of you, what do you think is the critical factors that is important to make this particular compact, or any compact, really have value?
There's a little bit of a different answer to that now than maybe when we first thought about it over a year ago. Because a year ago, I mean, just acknowledging that, you know, in Cambridge, we know that 80% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings, and it comes from, you know, municipal buildings, institutional buildings, commercial buildings. And so that, in a lot of ways, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions is what sort of drove the formation of it. What's happened in the and that still is very much a driving force, and that's why one of our priorities is around buildings and reduction. What's happened in between that, quite honestly, is the Net Zero Task Force. That, in certain ways, has just sort of taken over things. And there's so many meetings and deadlines around that, that we're trying not to have what many people are beginning to think of as meeting fatigue.
Yes.
And trying to make sure that we're really trying to use people's times in the most effective way, because obviously a lot of the work of the Net Zero Task Force and then how the compact is going to be able to help that discussion is critical. I mean, that's one of the critical discussions. And so part of it is going to be, and some of it is sort of waiting for recommendations in terms of we might be more engaged in sort of some of the implementation pieces of that. It's just sort of one thought.
Anyone else want to reflect on this?
I think that I think one of the things that Henrietta did so marvelously is really to get Raphael Reif and Drew Faust immediately as part of the compact.
So that's
one of the
leadership.
Largest,
they are presidents
yeah.
of our two.
And you know, as Israel, I think will agree. Once our presidents get some idea in their head and a commitment to it, they hold our feet to the fire pretty effectively. And I think over the last year, as I understand it, you've also been very successful in getting many, many other people to now sign on to it. So it's not just MIT and Harvard and the city. It's all the people that, you know, the businesses in Cambridge. So I think that that's been an amazing effort over the last year. I think we have to sustain that. And then we have to really focus on what the issues that we, you know, there's a myriad of issues, whether it's net zero, a whole bunch of different things that we can do. But I think now zeroing in on 2 or 3 things we want to get done over the next year and start to execute on those.
Excellent.
I mean, I would add maybe 2 operational recommendations. And one is, I think, identify a staff member whose mind share is devoted to that work, right? So I think we sit in our institutions with Heather and Julie, and Julie has not even been here for a year at MIT. I think you sit in the Boston Wind River Commission with a staff person driving the work, and we hope to see now in the compact. And then identifying one top priority to work, which in this case I would say the net zero one is helping us be that priority.
I think for us it's realizing that even we're here in the community, we have buildings, we have the city, we have universities, we have private sector. The universities and Novartis, we share a lot in common, that we have a lot of laboratories. I think with for me, success for the compact is defined in terms of getting the right minds at the table, sharing what we each are individually doing, so we're not reinventing the wheel in our silos, and really having that cross-cutting dialogue and adding, as Rob was saying, adding value.
So I heard inspiration, I heard leadership, I had real doers with priorities, and knowing we have common interests, common values. I think that's great. I forgot to do something. We've been sitting, right? And you've been traveling before this. And we've had lunch. Just stand up in place. And, you know, and do our mantras or whatever we do. Stretch. We needed that, right? Yeah, we never. How many sit at a desk as long as you've been sitting in this room, right? In any given half a day? No. Good. And Colin, if we had more time, we'd line them up in our order here, right? Of believers and doers and stuff. All right. Good. Thanks so much. Do I see hands going up? Great. I saw Colin's first, so and then you, then over here. All right, Colin?
Katie, I had a question for you. You mentioned about the early targets, 30% by 2016, and then there was discussion about whether it included or excluded growth. Is growth good, as in, you know, the Gordon Gekko type role? How do you balance that growth versus the need to hit those targets? And I think one of your last slides where you had the people in the middle and the students and staff, you had the deans over here. Surely the deans who are buying, you know, a new building, a bigger building, more tools and toys. How do you balance those trade-offs you have to make for growth and your sustainability targets?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I'm sorry.
No, great question.
Constantly reminds me of that. And particularly a place with regard to Harvard, we're actually talking about expanding into Alston across the river, where the business school is and our athletic buildings. And so that's a natural tension that we have to face constantly. And one of the things that we've done, we've put a process in place where all capital projects, before they're probably a conceptual design in the first instance, and they then go through this rigorous review, whether it be financial, all sorts of regulatory issues. But then the Office of Sustainability actually starts to analyze the project vis-a-vis our goal of 30%. And there's a lot of influence at that point in terms of introducing all sorts of the green building standards that we have, making sure that people don't value engineer out of a project, as we all know, a lot of these important initiatives. So it is a natural tension. I mean, growth and new toys and new buildings, et cetera. But we try and keep the people's feet to the fire in terms of making sure that if they want to grow, they have to incorporate all of the standards and guidelines that we have in order to make sure that we don't make our challenge of 30% even harder than it already is. And we also do a lot of commissioning of new buildings, but also we've done extensive auditing of our existing buildings, particularly our research labs. And doing some very impressive work in our research labs to get the directors to understand the importance of implementing some of the initiatives in terms of whether it be the fume hood, the air exchanges, all of that. So we've been somewhat successful, not as successful as we hope to be, but I've been impressed of late.
Good. Anyone else want to comment on growth? No? No? Question here. Okay.
My name is René Schwarzenbach, ETH Zurich. First, I have a quick question for Israel. You announced the environmental initiative of MIT. The first one failed. What are the lessons learned that it's going to be better? That's a simple question, maybe. But the other question is sort of a scaling up question. I can see that on a local level, in an area where intellectual density is reasonably high, okay, that this communication between science, between academia, between the town, between different people, to build a common future and to demonstrate how it can work with less energy, with whatever less resources. Now, my question is, here are two of the most famous universities in the world, and they somehow do not manage to bring this up to a governmental level in the United States. It's the same in other countries, so I'm not just blaming you. So what needs to be done to improve that? Not just show an example that it works, but sort of translate it to a higher level. And there is maybe one point, it's a word, and then I'm finished. Climate change is not a crisis. This is very important to communicate to the politicians, because the politicians are used that crises are going to be over. Climate change is not going to be over. So it's going to change this world in a dramatic way. And so what I think the message has to be, look, it's not only adaptation to something that we don't really know what's happening, it's mitigation also. And it's mitigation on a global level. You can't do anything locally. I mean, every CO2 molecule going out, it doesn't depend where it's going out. So it's this level which is not a local level. And I realize that you have to do something locally so people experience they can do something, but bring it up. So this is my question. How can this be done?
Personally, I think that we contribute to the world and impact the world by framing the right questions and solving the right issues. And it doesn't matter, right? So you could be Rob standing up there and say, what does leadership mean? You can add and substitute leadership by sustainability, and I think you'll have the same diversity of opinion on what sustainability means across this room and certainly around the world. So I think it is hard to get politicians' attention, especially these days. But I think framing the right questions and contributing to framing the problems, maybe not as a headline newspaper, this is a crisis, the world is falling apart, but really framing the scientific basis as well as what's possible. Because the truth is, many of the things that we say, these are very sustainable and energy efficient, it is true, they come at a trade-off. And the trade-off in many cases is cost or other kinds of things. We need to be clear. It's systems thinking, right? I mean, we call it system thinking. I mean, politicians by definition are not system thinkers. I mean, they are not voted in China. They are voted here. They are voted by voters who are local. That is a major imbalance in how you're trying to solve a global question.
I can just add, I think the timing really makes a big difference, and unfortunately, having some crises that have happened over the last couple of years have really brought it more that you can talk about climate change, you can talk about storm surge, you can talk about flooding impacts when you talk about Sandy, when you talk about Katrina. It becomes, there's a time when people are sort of beginning to listen to what some of the solutions might be to some of these potential crises that could be coming.
And as Rob indicated, I think, as he was mentioning, watching a debate yesterday about climate change and how, his feeling was that people should step back. We need to get the facts out there because they were still debating facts on this. But I also want to amplify on your point about taking away the term crisis, because having seen what happened, so there, we say there's a crisis, and then the first, warm day in the summer, or some people are like, oh, see, we're not in a crisis. It's not, nothing's different. So all the, they point to what they want to point to. But I think if you take away the word crisis, no one can debate the fact that all of this is happening. And it may be slow and it may be fast in different places. But when you say it's a crisis, then the people take that first thing, that data that can disprove a crisis, and then the debate starts all over again.
I think just for our foreign visitors, I think you realize our institutions, unlike some other high academics, we don't lobby. We really, to be advocates for something in society is adverse to our demeanor as faculty. And so I think in some ways we're doing it just as you were saying, and we're doing it through the intellectual capital we can bring to this. Is that enough in society right now? I agree with you. It's not enough. Over here.
My question is more granular, I suppose. From what I heard today, it's coming from top. We're talking about leaders and everything else, trying to make things happen. My point of view is, how much did your students actually had an input on what's happening? And how can I actually convince my university, our academics, to do what you've been doing, like the compact treaty, I suppose, was fantastic, and making the campuses living laboratories absolutely amazing. But I'd like to take this back to my university and actually say, look, they're doing something fantastic there. Can we do something? What would be your advice?
Well, I think both here at Harvard and when I was at the University of California, in fact, most of the initiative, if not all the initiative at University of California, came from the students. They demanded it. And then the leadership responded. Drew saw it when she was the dean of Radcliffe, and when she became president, and saw the groundswell of demands by our students who want the planet to be there for themselves and their children and their grandchildren. They demanded the change, and so Drew took that as the foundation upon which to put out this fairly aggressive goal. My advice is tap into your students, because they're talking about this, and you should listen to them, and your leaders will listen to them.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Katie mentioned that when Henrietta called Raphael and Drew answered the call. I think that is true and easier when they know absolutely that our communities behind it are there, right? If she had called on an issue in which we had not had that support, I'm not sure Raphael would have been so clear in a nanosecond responding to that. So I do think it is a ground swell of support. Our students, I think, share a passion for their planet, both at Harvard and MIT, and they feel that while they're here, they have both the energy and the intellectual access to really making a global impact to the extent that that's possible. And I think youth can be mobilized much easier than kind of the leadership can, really.
We have another element that's acting locally, and that is our citizenry, and very dedicated and active. They might not be the majority, but they are an active, dedicated, well-educated citizenry that are pushing our cities to be better. And that is another dynamic tension that's in play here. So here and then, please.
Hi, my name is Amr Atiyah from King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, KAUST. My question is about the economic angle of sustainability initiatives or projects. You know, it's a project, you have to justify it economically, and namely the ROI, the return on investment. How is it done at a university level if you want to take, for example, the Harvard initiative to reduce the carbon footprint by 30%, and the city, for example, the compact we have in Cambridge? Do we have to justify each project and have a certain ROI, or we have a criteria to bypass or overlook at the ROI at a certain extent?
That's a good question. Well, what we did here at Harvard was we actually worked with all the facility managers in all the schools, and whether it be for existing buildings and new projects coming forward. And we work with them to lay out the ROI. And in most instances, I would say in the first several years of us looking at energy efficient initiatives we could do in our facilities, whether it's lighting or air exchanges or et cetera, we were able to show the schools a real positive ROI. And you know, this is particularly in the wake of the financial crisis as well. So we actually had that actually working for us, because deans were seeing, I mean, if I invest in this in 2 years, I have an ROI of whatever. That really actually jettisoned a lot of things because people saw that that was a benefit. We also, there were obviously ones where the ROI is not as obvious. But we do have tools that are ready to try and get people to still invest in those projects. So we have a fund, which we have $12 million in it, but we actually lend out to the schools to do some of the projects that they may not otherwise have done because the ROI was not exactly what they were hoping for, but we knew that it would be the benefit for the 30% goal. So we've used that as a tool in which to get people to really focus and do what we think are the right things. But I have to say that because of when you can put the ROI on, in front of the CFO and say, look, in 3 years or 2 years' time, we're going to get this benefit, all the barriers seem to fall away.
For us, it was easy. It has been easier here in Cambridge because, well, as a function in Novartis, we report up into the CFO. So we're involved at the get-go of project design and discussing that ROI right up front. You know, reporting to the CFO helps.
Can I just add something? I'm going to ask Heather to add something to this because I think this is important for this audience to know. On our Green Harvard EDU website, there is a little training tool on life cycle costing. We have our students to learn this. And I think it embeds in that what Harvard uses as the default values on how far out you want to amortize the savings or costs and something like that. I think it's 20 years, I think, for some things, which is very different than a business model. So that, right, do I have it all right so they can find it on the website? Great.
The other thing Katie did that she's not taking credit for is that she actually saw the linkages between greenhouse gas and energy with 5-year capital planning. So now every single project has to analyze what their project does to greenhouse gas emissions and energy. And that has been a tremendous tool of truly institutionalizing sustainability, because now our office can step back, we analyze the data, but we don't have to go project by project to get it. The other thing is that the facilities leaders and finance deans worked on this life cycle cost calculator that Jack is talking about, and they did look at a 20-year period, and we were able also through the executive committee to actually get people to agree that an 11-year payback or better or so, just you should not come and ask. If you you should do these projects, and if you need the money, use the revolving fund like Katie said. to do it. And that has really increased the number of energy conservation measures and decreased the red tape of getting these projects to happen more quickly.
So I hope that's of value. These were instrumental, thanks for the question, instrumental of moving our institution. Reed.
Thanks. I'm Davis Bookhart. I'm with Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And the question is this. We have very aggressive goals. 30% by 2016 is very aggressive. So congratulations on such a task. But what it means is that you're also asking really everybody to be involved. It's not just one or two people. And it means that all the way down the chain of command, you're asking people to take risks. And taking risks sometimes can get people out of their comfort zone. Because if they try to do something, even with the best intentions, if it doesn't work, they can be penalized for that. That ends up on their performance reviews and so forth. So how do you give the message to your managers and sub-levels down that taking risks is okay, that you're going to share some of that, they won't be penalized for trying to go outside of their comfort zone, and it's what you're trying to encourage?
Well, I think a lot of that is, obviously having Drew Faust, stating such an aggressive goal and gives people a lot of space to work in. And we do encourage people to try everything out. And sometimes they won't achieve the goal. Oftentimes they don't fail. It just may not achieve the aggressive goals that they set forth for themselves. But one of the ways we also try and institutionalize this way of thinking is we have an annual Green Heroes Award ceremony. It is a very big ceremony. It's held over in Sanders Theater, where you're going to have dinner tonight. And we celebrate the green heroes. And some of them are things that have transformed, and other ones that are just, they tried, they really had a focus, and maybe didn't achieve as much as what they set out to do. But the fact that they set out to do something is something that we celebrate. So we give out, a dozen or so awards? Maybe every school. And in central administration, all the different departments within central administration. And Drew attends the awards. And it's been an amazing transformation of people trying to do some obvious things, but oftentimes very creative things.
Can you hand it to?
Can I add one thing, maybe just to give you a dose of the difficulty and the reality, at least on our end. So I'm sure all of you have managed projects, and you know the three variables that you manage in a project, right? So cost, time, and scope. And now you talk about a capital project, because the reality is, as you saw with maybe your pie chart, but I think every pie chart that we could choose would show you the same thing, the impact of like HVAC to energy costs. So yes, every person needs to be involved, but there are persons that matter most. And if you realize in this 80-20 and how that deployment of resources works, to the extent that you need a mind shift on like what cost is. Because in a capital project, typically the cost and what we ask to fundraise for has been the construction cost. So what you've optimized, any program manager who's worked in a capital project optimizes for that initial investment. It's very hard in that industry to really shift the mindset to a 20-year kind of timeline, life cycle costing. It's really, really tough. You may achieve 1 level, 2 levels, 3 levels penetration, but I can tell you that all the construction workers, everybody else is set on cost in a different way. I think it's difficult. It's also difficult to start right at the beginning before the concept works, because when a professor has a great idea, the need is here, and it needs to be done. Sustainability always tends to be seen as an appendage, right? And that's another difficult mind shift that we're working to try to bring upstream and really bring the sustainability. Because my argument is most of the perceived cost of sustainability is actually not there. It just wasn't thought at the beginning at the right time. But it is challenging, and it is where I think offices like Heather's or Julie's make the contribution and impact in working on a daily basis with those folks. I know it's tough on them, at least on these two. I don't know for you. But it is absolutely necessary, right? It is like the risk manager in Wall Street. That job was tough. It continues to be tough. It's less tough after 2008. But I think here, I think the perspective that matters.
So Ben Casimir from the ISCN. Thank you very much for this great collaboration, for showcasing it. I've got a question about global learning around this. What I really liked, I think you brought this up, not reinventing the wheel. Between you try really to see what the others are doing, not reinventing it. What about you and other compacts? I mean, in this room, we've got a Milano City Compact that has been there for years, 2 big universities, city, etc. Novartis Basel has been involved for more than a decade in a 2,000 watt pilot region with universities, with government. We just, on the other hand, have very recent things. I think Sapporo in Japan is just signing one with their university involved here. Instead of reinventing it all the time, what can you learn from the other town-ground relationships in our network, and what do you think you can teach to others trying this?
Well, I mean, can I try turning the question back to you, right? Because I think, and I'll use different examples, right? But I do think the ISCN has the potential to create a standard for sharing. That when you think about the kinds of things we've been enabling in the past, it's really hard for one single institution, even two, or a compact to create that. Perhaps we're positioned here with this, the Cambridge Compact to become that standard, or the guardians of such a standard. But I do think that is one of the challenges in progress in many of these issues, how to norm the sharing of that. Maybe the ISCN has an opportunity to frame that and to really then say, okay, all of your learnings, all of your experiments, I think back to your question on ROI, sharing the ROI experiments, I think, is a big deal. And from a trusted source, this is kind of how you go and do it. So that perhaps there's an actual meaningful, very impactful contribution to be made by you.
I would add to that in terms of having the ISCN have a role in identifying what the gaps are right now. What are the gaps in these type of collaborative efforts? And then how can it be framed to address and close those gaps by 2020, for example? So no compact or collaborative agreement is perfect. You learn from it. But identify where the gaps are now. Is it information sharing? Is it global IT platforms to share knowledge? Is it online learning between corporations and public sectors? Staffing, yeah.
Good. That's a great suggestion. Kurt? Yep.
Kurt Teichert. I'm a taxpayer in the city of Providence, and I also work for Brown University, which, as you know, pays a very high payment in lieu of taxes to the city of Providence. So going back to the financial returns model, I guess the context that I want to put on is it sufficient for MIT and Novartis and Harvard to look at the internal rate of return on these investments? And do really any investments and improvements in buildings have to factor in the social impacts and the benefits to the community? I notice in the compact there is agreement to raise grants, but I don't see anything in terms of financing it. So I guess my question would be, is the payment in lieu of taxes that the nonprofit institutions make, or the high taxes that I'm sure Novartis that pays, one opportunity to leverage some of the action that's taken here, and how can the universities help in analyzing these programs and investments in a way that maximizes the social return on the investment, not just the internal return to your individual institutions?
Cambridge, we think about, Harvard and MIT in much bigger terms than the payment in lieu of taxes, right? They obviously are huge contributors to Cambridge, and Cambridge would be a very different city if you didn't have Harvard and MIT in them. So it's a much, much bigger return on investment, I guess you would say.
And that used to be sufficient.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that as Harvard and MIT in particular, and Novartis now, as they think about growth, as they think about campus planning, as they're thinking about it, they very much, I think, are thinking about, they have to, sort of by demand from the community, but they very much are thinking about how their buildings, how their programs interact with the city, that it's really more of a win-win. Really, there's a demand that you have to think about what's Kendall Square going to look like 10, 20, 30 years? And MIT is very much thinking about that. That's absolutely the same thing in terms of Harvard as they think about their planning. So I think the city feels very much as partners with them in that.
That's just sort of part of the ethos of what we do. Do we have a particular template that we follow to ensure that those aspects are included? We're not there yet. I can tell you on a global level, we've recently undertaken a materiality analysis of what's important to our stakeholders, both internal and external, and what issues are important from a social perspective and environmental perspective. And we have those framed now for the corporation, the big issues that are material. Now, what are we going to do about it as a company? So I think we can take that global viewpoint and then act locally as its particular city.
Let me respond in part. If we had a panel of academics sitting here instead of administrators and government leaders, corporate leaders, I think we would have answered this differently. We know that Harvard's paying 10 cents a kilowatt hour for, we buy it in bulk for electricity. We also know the health cost of that carbon-based electricity. We know the social cost of coal and CO2 and the greenhouse gases, because there's been some good analysis. So we should be factoring in 22 cents, 24 cents a kilowatt hour into our calculus. We don't, and this is a big divide. So I agree with you entirely.
Thank you, Dave Corman. I'm Director for Social Responsibility and Sustainability at Edinburgh University. And I was just thinking and reflecting really on what's come up so far. I think it's been a great conference. We're new members, so thank you. It's been great. But when you think about collaboration and leveraging collective action, we're looking at our supply chains. And I know that the corporate sector will be, but it's interesting that it hasn't really come up so far. So, for example, we joined the Worker Rights Coalitions just to make sure there's no evil in our supply chain when we're buying clothing. And then we thought, well, actually electronics, we're concerned about human rights and we're concerned about labor standards and so on. So I just want to put to the panel really, and maybe the audience, there's a possible opportunity there in terms of we've worked with other universities in Europe and with an NGO called People and Planet, just to kind of get together and look at what we're buying in terms of electronics and seeing, well, we know that companies will respond to pressure over time, but we need the evidence. And we hope to maybe use our students as part of the study program as well to say, well, tell you what, it's quite expensive for us to fly all the time, but you're going anyway. Go and have a look at what the companies are actually saying and so on. So just a suggestion maybe that I'm interested in the panel's views about that as an area for leveraging action. Thank you.
Keep the mic for a second. I have a follow-up question.
So, sorry. So we have a responsible procurement program that we've kicked off that looks at our supply web. Really, it's not a supply chain as simple as a supply chain anymore, but our supply web and our key suppliers, and use the power of Novartis purchasing power to enforce certain standards on our suppliers, including environmental standards, labor standards, anti-bribery standards, and so forth. Getting that program off the ground is challenging. The suppliers are everywhere, trying to have the quality people, the environmental auditors, responsible procurement, all not make 6 visits to the same key supplier, trying to integrate that process more, but it's something that definitely we have kicked off about 2 years ago. So it's still learning phases. But.
We just hired a chief procurement officer who's, among other things, his focus is to work with Heather and her team to make sure where our supply chain is coming from, whether it be making sure that it's, we're buying organic regional foods, all the things that we will buy. In addition, we're doing a major rehaul of our river houses where all the undergraduates live, and buying the furniture, and I believe Jack and his team were very much involved in looking at the type of furniture that we were putting into these rooms and making sure that it's sustainable and it's not emitting chemicals, et cetera. So we try and do it. It's not as probably aligned as yours is, but that's what our focus has been. And it came out of the task force report that came out late last year to the president, saying this is another area that you need a lot more focus. And the other area was around Scope 3 emissions, that we need to start to capture those. Opens up another whole challenge. But those are areas where we were pretty forward-leaning in terms of next steps.
So it seems like your institutions and communities have a very strong engagement, very strong support from the top leadership, but also on all levels. So it's not easy to describe, but how have you succeeded in it? And what are your future goals for the coming years and coming decades? What ideas do you have in mind after maybe achieving that 30% reduction or so? And what kind of themes you are or thinking to approach? And after hearing your answers, I would like to pose a question to Julie and Heather, that are you happy with those plans, or would you like to set more ambitious goals even?
They both would like to have their jobs at the end of this conference.
I'm sorry.
But they're risk takers, so maybe.
So let me make it easy. So my plan is to ask Julie for a plan of what we should do.
And I've already asked Heather for the plan. But I think that actually the fact that this task force of faculty, students, and staff reaffirmed the 30% goal and said to the president, we think you still need to achieve that goal, was a pretty important stake in the ground. But as I mentioned, the other two areas that you talked about is Scope 3 emissions and starting to track that. That's a huge thing, and we're going to have to figure out ways in which to do that. And it's going to just make that goal of 30% even more hard to achieve. And looking at our supply chains. And what can we do as an institution to change behaviors, but also making sure that everything we procure on behalf of the university is a sustainable type of chain. I don't know if
I never say no to the mic. It's dangerous, I know. No, I mean we're just in such an interesting place. I mean, as many of you know, I've just joined MIT thanks to Israel, and I think we have, as you can see, the leadership exists, the foundation exists, and hopefully you won't get sick of me saying this, but what I'm determined to do is with our team is to figure out what can we learn from my past experiences at Yale and other places, working with Harvard, and figure out where MIT, what should our actually, sometimes I worry that just a greenhouse gas goal may be too narrow. And so what I hope to do internally, Israel and I for the past couple of months have been working on what our internal governance structure should look like and ask maybe a broader set of questions. Don't listen to Harvard, close your ears. What that broader set of questions is. So a component of that will be a greenhouse gas goal, but I think we have to ask some larger questions around. I don't know what those questions are yet. Let me hold off on what those may be. But I think we may want to frame it a little differently, since we're not, at this point, MIT is not tied to a goal, so we get to now contextualize that moving forward. So I'm hoping I'm using this conference actually to hear from many of you as to maybe new directions people are heading. Do I still have my job?
Yeah, you do. I might not, but you do. Sorry.
So one, I think, I agree with Julie. I mean, I think that the thing, again, here that enables our office to do what we do, and can convene all the stakeholders and get input and do these processes that can take time, but lead to a better outcome, and once are decided, are really able to be implemented and people own it, is really due to the senior leadership. So that's the key thing, I think. And I'm very, I think our process and our greenhouse gas goal and the fact that it gets reviewed every 4 years and continuously improved with long-term goals, with short-term targets, I think is tremendous. But I think it's not only, and we don't view it only as greenhouse gas goal. I mean, climate obviously is the huge looming thing. But I think also back to our research and teaching, the other things, two things that we're doing. One of which President Faust, it came out of the task force report, and President Faust wholeheartedly agreed. So that is that we're actually, with Katie's help, convening a faculty sustainability committee in the next year that will be researchers cross-disciplinary coming together to inform us on what should be the future vision, what's the next 10 years of sustainability look like on Harvard's campus. There will be students on that, and there will also, of course, be input from staff. But I think that's huge. So again, I think the senior leadership and the vision piece, and then the bottom up from the faculty, students, and staff is important. The other thing is we always knew that we had to figure out in a decentralized world to implement our greenhouse gas goal and how you do that, because there are no mandates, there are no goals that are non-academic across, was we had to walk and we had to prove that we could do that. And I think through the executive committee's oversight, we've been able to prove that, and in working with stakeholders like Craig Bradford, who's in the room, and others, we've proven that. And we always thought that the next step was then creating a more holistic plan. And in fact, Drew forgets nothing, I don't know how, but that's the other thing. We're about to deliver to Katie and her co-chairs of the executive committee a more holistic sustainability plan for the university. That again has been a 1.5-year stakeholder process. So that is again beyond just, it is a more holistic plan. A lot of it just acknowledges what has happened, but there are also some accountability and goals moving forward that are more holistic. And then I think the last thing I would just say is everything that we do, again, has a lens of continuous improvement. I can't remember who, maybe it was Davis, who said you want to set standards, but you want to continuously improve them. And that's what we try to do. So everything we do, our green building standards are currently getting upgraded. We constantly are continuously improving them. So I am very happy with that strategy. And I'm very happy working for Katie, so I definitely hope I still have my job.
You do. So, by setting greenhouse gas reduction goals that we cannot meet by conventional tightening of our buildings, creates a market, creates a local market, creates a market for all the employees that work for that institution. It's figuring out how to leverage that to get those reductions. So there's a real value, I think, by putting the stretch in there. One last question, Murs. You were waiting patiently, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. My name is Mahesh. I'm with the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. Yeah, my question, and before that, I'd like to thank you for such very inspiring, I think the case study working with Cambridge, the compact, was very inspiring. But I'd like to focus on the students, yeah, and the learners. Someone said it's the elephant in the room, the learners, in the sense that the number of international students that are both at MIT and Harvard, and the responsibility of taking back some of this with the international students, with partnerships abroad in terms of sustainability. Is there some thinking along these lines, number one? And number two is looking, I guess, in terms of the tracking of alumni as thought leaders on sustainability. Is this something that you're actively promoting?
On the second part of your question, the alumni, I can say that having spoken to many of them as part of our campaign that we launched last year, many of them are coming to us saying, I'd like to give you money, but I'd like to invest it in something that addresses climate change. So we have a tremendous amount of alumni who really want to have that kind of an impact and are directing their philanthropy into this very area. So we've been blessed by that. With regard to having students not only get involved, but also particularly foreign students going back home with lessons learned, some of the things we try and do in our innovation lab that we opened across the river in Alston, over the last 2 years, we've been doing President's Challenges, and many of those President Challenges, so people get $100,000 if they have a great idea and the president invests in them, and many of those have been around around environmental or climate change challenges that are facing the world. So that's one small way of trying to make sure that these students stick with it. And a couple of the ideas that came out of that President's Challenge actually are having impact across the globe. And Heather can give you some examples of those.
Good. Thank you all for your questions and active participation and the panel. I am so sorry. The last
this
word
is what
from
happens
MIT
at Harvard when you're
Junior
from
College.
MIT.
All right, just moving right on. We'll just...
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to add maybe that there's a couple of initiatives that I think the biggest issue is to be able to implant in our students, either international or US domestic, kind of the Intel Inside motto for sustainability. And I think so they're going to become the advocates in the corporations when they go and work for somebody like her. to really advocate for rigor, for transformational ROI, et cetera, et cetera. That is the biggest thing. We have, just to highlight one, a sustainability lab at MIT Sloan School, in which we have a partnership with 30 companies, in which all of their students get sent out to solve an issue around energy. And then they come back to the campus, they share, they kind of globally get together, and they go back with a transformed impetus, right? So they know they want to do good for the planet. Now they know, and they have some tools to really make that happen. And I mean, we could share more if you wanted to.
All right. Anyone? Anyone at all?